My wife and daughter left me for a guy they met at the mechanic shop. I never thought my life could fall apart in such a spectacularly shitty way. One moment I was Hans Schmidt, a 42-year-old electrician with a loving family, and the next I was a broken man watching everything I held dear crumble right in front of my eyes. It all started on a seemingly normal Tuesday. My wife, Greta, had taken our daughter, Helga, to the local mechanic shop to get the car's brakes checked. The place was owned by a guy named Carl Mueller, a real smooth talker with a reputation for being a ladies' man. I never paid him much mind. After all, he was just the mechanic, right? When they came back from the shop, something felt off. Greta was unusually chipper, and Helga, who usually couldn't stop talking about her day, was unusually quiet. I brushed it off as nothing. Maybe they just had a long day. Later that night, as I lay in bed next to Greta, I noticed her texting someone. I didn't think much of it until I saw her smile, a smile I hadn't seen in years. That smile wasn't for me. My heart sank, but I convinced myself I was just being paranoid. Weeks passed, and the tension in our house grew thicker. Greta and Helga started spending more time running errands together, and I often found them giggling over their phones. I knew something was up, but I couldn't bring myself to confront them. One evening I got home early from work. I walked in to find Greta and Helga dressed to the nines, laughing like they were in on some private joke. Greta's eyes widened when she saw me, and she quickly composed herself. "Oh, Hans, you're home early," she said a little too brightly. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "We're just going out for a girls' night," Greta replied, avoiding my gaze. "Again?" I said, a bit sharper than intended. "What's that supposed to mean?" she snapped. "Nothing," I muttered, defeated. "Just be safe." As they left, I felt like a stranger in my own home. I paced around the house, trying to shake off the feeling of dread. That's when I decided to do something I never thought I'd do. I snooped through Greta's phone. What I found shattered me. There were dozens of messages between Greta and Carl, each one more intimate than the last. They were planning a future together, talking about how they couldn't wait to be free. The most heartbreaking part? Helga was in on it, cheering them on. I felt like I was going to vomit. My wife and daughter had betrayed me, and for what? Some sleazy mechanic? I confronted Greta that night. I showed her the messages, my hands shaking with rage and heartbreak. She didn't even deny it. Instead, she looked at me with cold, unfeeling eyes. "I'm not happy with you anymore, Hans," she said bluntly. "Carl makes me feel alive." "And what about Helga? What about our family?" I shouted, tears streaming down my face. "Helga wants to be with Carl too. She thinks you're too controlling," Greta replied, her words cutting deeper than any knife. I was stunned. My own daughter thought I was the problem? I couldn't wrap my head around it. I left the house that night, unable to stay in a place that no longer felt like home. I moved into a shitty apartment across town. Every day was a struggle to keep going. I threw myself into my work, trying to drown out the pain. My colleagues noticed the change, but I couldn't bring myself to talk about it. One day, I ran into Helga at the grocery store. She looked different, older somehow. She ignored me at first, but I couldn't just let her walk away. "Helga," I called out, my voice cracking. "Can we talk?" She turned to face me, her expression a mix of guilt and defiance. "What do you want, Dad?" "I want to understand," I said, trying to keep my composure. "Why did you choose Carl over me?" She sighed, looking away. "Mom's happy with Carl. He treats her well. And he treats me well, too." I felt a surge of anger. "I'm your father, Helga. I always treated you well." "It's not the same," she snapped. "You're always working, always stressed. Carl's fun. He listens." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. My own daughter had chosen a stranger over me because he was fun. I didn't know what to say, so I just walked away, feeling more lost than ever. Months turned into a year. I heard through the grapevine that Greta and Carl had moved in together, with Helga happily tagging along. They were a new family now, and I was just a footnote in their story. I started going to therapy, trying to piece my life back together. It wasn't easy, but slowly, I began to heal. I even started dating again, though the scars of my past still lingered. One day, I got a call from Helga. She sounded upset, and for the first time in a long time, I heard a hint of my little girl in her voice. "Dad, can we talk?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Of course," I said, my heart racing. We met at a cafe, and she poured out her heart. Carl wasn't the man she thought he was. He was controlling, manipulative, and had a temper. Greta was miserable, but too scared to leave. Helga wanted to come back home. I felt a mix of anger and relief. They had chosen this life, and now they were reaping what they sowed. But despite everything, they were still my family. "Helga, you can always come home," I said softly, "but it's going to take time to rebuild what we had." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry, Dad. I was wrong." As I hugged her, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to heal together. Life had dealt us a shitty hand, but we were still standing. And for now, that was enough.